We're at the final session of the day, our keynote address by Malachy Browne. So we're delighted to be finishing with this. And if we're not giving too many spoilers, I think you're in for a treat. Malachy ran through his presentation with myself and Suneva a couple of weeks ago, and I was blown away by it, by the level of work that he's about to sort of show you and how things operate. But Malachy is a senior producer with the New York Times video unit. His focus is investigative journalism that combines traditional reporting with the forensic analysis of video and audio material. In 2021, he co-directed Day of Rage, an Oscar-nominated shortlisted documentary on the US Capitol riot. In 2020, he produced several reports into the killing of Black people by the police and vigilantes in the US, events that inspired nationwide protests for racial injustice. The series included an investigation that used crime scene evidence to show how a botched police raid led to the killing of Breonna Taylor in her own home. Malachy also led a series of reports proving that Russia repeatedly bombed hospitals and civilians in Syria, and he has produced other investigations into the Las Vegas mass shooting, chemical attacks in Syria, and military killings in Gaza. Malachy's work has been awarded a Pulitzer Prize, 4 News Emmys, and a long list that I won't even go through of the beginnings of his many awards and accolades. And most importantly, Malachy hails originally from County Limerick. So we're delighted to have him home in Ireland to do this final address of the day. So over to you, Malachy.
Thanks a million, Ross. Now, I know it's the afternoon, and the last thing anybody wants is a presentation, but this is probably the best way of explaining what it is that I do and the team does at the Times, and we call it visual investigations. And I suppose it's all in the name. You know, it's what we do is traditional reporting. You know, subject matter experts talking to witnesses, going to the scene, observing events, but also the collection of evidence. And we take a very evidentiary approach to our work, and it's particularly relevant, I think, with trust eroding in media and governments and institutions. What we try to do is find hard facts that back up what people are telling us, what witnesses to an event are telling us, and cut through the bluster and the bullshit sometimes that governments offer in denial of atrocities, or even just in an explanatory way to kind of clear away the fog from a chaotic event like the Las Vegas shooting or the Capitol riot, and show it in its totality. And so I call out spatial, temporal, and audio-visual evidence here, which sounds very dry, but we take a very dry approach, as you'll see in the stories that I'm going to go through to our work, at least to the analysis of it. And that helps us then with the structure of the story. So our approach is collect and analyze, repeatedly collect and analyze as much evidence as we can. This is a building struck during a chemical weapons attack in Khan Sheikhoun that killed 80 people, that Russia and Syria denied responsibility for. We were talking to witnesses on the ground who showed us the buildings that had been struck, and they had metadata embedded in their photographs that give us the hour, minute, and second that the photograph on the left is taken. But we'll also cross-corroborate that with satellite images that are taken of that place on that day, and you can see that strike happened on that building in the time frame that the witness is telling us. So that lends itself to the credibility of the witness as well in other things that they're going to tell us. We'll use flight trackers and ship trackers. This is a ship that turned off its tracker coming into Sardinia to pick up a load of bombs to take to Saudi Arabia. We had found these weapons at the sites of attacks on civilians in Yemen that were being led by the UAE and by Saudi Arabia. And so we started monitoring how many were being exported and the licenses and so on. Our investigation into that actually led Italy to suspend its export of those weapons to Saudi Arabia. When we heard reports that there was scorched earth policy in Tigray in Ethiopia, we're not just using satellite images, but satellite data such as infrared data that detects fires. Now, a lot of these might be forest fires, these red dots, but zooming in, you can see there's lots of them around a road. And by ordering up satellite imagery of that precise location in the road, you can see that agricultural land and buildings are being raised. And that might be the starting point for an investigation then, to go and talk to people, collect video evidence and whatnot. So we also then, we're collecting a lot of videos. This is the shooting day into a crowd and killed Razan al-Najjar. She was a volunteer medic, really inspirational woman, who was the first female medic to volunteer on those fields, and many more women came from their workplaces and joined her in the effort in treating protesters who were wounded. But what we're doing here, quite scientifically, is aligning up the moment of that gunshot, so we can examine from lots of different angles what's happening, and we also might use Cinema 4D to take, make a pano of a video that's being filmed by a witness, just to show what's going on between the fence where the soldiers are and the protesters that they fired into, what action was happening, which is relevant to the story. We also sent up drones with high definition cameras to film the area. This was experimental, but it worked, and we were able to create a 3D model of the area. And then by inserting the videos, note the tufts of grass in the background there. The tufts of grass were so well captured by the drone that we're able to line up frames of the video and sketch in where everybody was in that moment and freeze that moment in time, and retrace the path of the bullet, which hit 2 people, and a third person was injured as well, right back to the fence where we saw the IDF soldiers taking up arms minutes beforehand and starting to fire into them, and also interrogate calculate the distance, show that there's nothing happening between the protesters and the fence, and then ask the question, well, is this justified under international law when there's no immediate risk to life or limb at the fence that they would use lethal force. We also, because we had collected 1,300 photos and videos directly from the witnesses that day, not just from social media, we had the metadata and we had minute by minute what happened. So we knew the minute that every gunshot was fired, and we knew who was hit in every moment. So when we went and interviewed the IDF, they realized, oh shit, these guys have way more information than we do. And for the first time ever in that interview, they admitted killing her, and then launched a criminal investigation. So the data helps. How do I get past this? See, it sounds all very technical until it's not. So we use 3D models and that sort of thing, and I'll show you a couple more examples of that. And then our team is a mix of all sorts of folks from all sorts of places, reporters, producers, animators, and video editors, basically. It's a team. This is a broader video team and many of the visual investigations unit, but it's a bunch of folks who are happy here. We're not always that happy. One quick example that I'll go through to kind of tee up the type of dot connecting that we do in disparate pieces of evidence is the lynching, basically, of Ahmaud Arbery in South Georgia. He was killed in February. Didn't really of 2019. 2020. Sorry, didn't really get a lot of attention until a video emerged, and many of you may have seen that video of him running down the street and then being shot in the street. And so it was 2 videos. There was one, the security camera of him walking into the neighborhood. This timestamp is off, and then the second one of him running and being killed. And so this is literally screenshots of my, my Google document. One day, lunchtime, curious what really happened to Arbery, and I was looking at these 2 videos that I quickly found online, and just started sketching out where he was. And he leaves this place. A truck goes after him, and then we find him running down here, in the direction you think he'd be running the opposite way to get away. So what happened, and what was the time in between that? So by asking the police through FOIA, along with my correspondent, Richard Fawcett, for this 911 calls, that day we had 2 911 calls with the exact hour, minute, and second embedded in the file name, which is a great starting point. And it just so happened that both of those 911 calls are made in 2 of the videos. So now we know there's a 5-minute gap between him leaving the scene and being pursued and being killed. You can see the man on the left picking the phone out, describing what's going on in his call and putting the phone back in the pocket. Just when it matches perfectly what you hear in the audio file. And in this one, you can hear the father of the killer, this is Gregory McMichael, on the back of the truck, also describing what's happening, but also the waveform of the audio in the 911 call synced up. And so forensically, you can tell that you're hearing the same thing, albeit with different. One is inside a truck, so it's more muted, and one is on the call. But they also, in the police documents, they forgot to redact certain things like the phone number that the second 911 call was made from, and it was from one of the McMichael's phones. And then by sketching all of that out, spreadsheets are our friend, chronology is our friend. Just what we see at every point in all of those videos, and that's basically the story then that we're going to tell and reconstruct what happened to him. In addition to the witness statements, a big question lingering over this was, it's a white neighborhood. There's a black man who's out for a jog, and the guys who killed him are interviewed. One of them has a relationship with the cops. He used to work with them, and only a single interview is taken, and then they're left on their merry way. Think about that in reverse. Think about a white jogger running down that street and being killed, and the two witnesses there are black men in South Georgia. And what would the police do in that instance? And so there was question at the time that this was a racially motivated attack, and that was borne out later through the communications that were interrogated of these guys, text messages that they sent to each other with racial slurs and to their friends, and the histories of some of these people as well. So the police reports into it stank, and the fact that these guys were let go, and then there was a relationship found between the district authorities and Michael, who worked for them as well. They recused themselves from the state, from the case, and then somebody else came in and they said, no, we need to investigate that. And then when the video emerged, it went wild. But this guy, in the meantime, who shot the video, tried to exonerate himself by talking to the press. But he revealed a lot more about his involvement in the case, and he actually jumped in his car, joined in the pursuit, and chased him around the neighborhood. And so he implicated himself. And so this is a more produced version of my original notes, sketching what happened and filling in the blanks, filling in those 5 minutes, what happened from the police statements and the interviews that this guy gave. And that's basically it. And so we showed that he was pursued for that length of time, but also there are also little details like the police arrived a minute later after he was shot, and they responded really quickly to it, but it just kind of adds some storytelling detail that had they been there, perhaps he may not have died. But he was chased up and down all over those roads and tried to get away repeatedly. When they were sentenced to murder, the judge repeatedly cited the fact that they had pursued him for 5 minutes. So it was an important detail to make public and was used in the case. Again, a very quick one. Ukrainian flight 752 shot down outside Tehran. Iran is denying any responsibility for it, saying it was engine failure. Again, this is syncing up videos. These are early morning videos. Very hard for us to geolocate them and figure out exactly where they are in the immediate moment. But you can see by synchronizing them up that they show the same thing, from the flare and then the crash and the glare, the glow of the flash and how long that lingers. And the three sources are describing the same thing. So the very first thing I heard when it was crashed down was, okay, which plane signal dropped? And I went on to Flight Radar 24, and my colleagues did as well. And we could see that this one that was headed for Ukraine lost its signal here, and that turned out to be the plane that crashed. And so we start building out the evidence we can collect from then. We're looking for, this is a town called Parand, looking for the Farsi for Parand on Telegram and Twitter, and there are witnesses there saying, heard two bangs. What was that thing was that an airplane on fire? And you're collecting all of this evidence. And the two bangs is of interest. And this is like later on, the crash site is over here. So what happened between the plane losing its signal here and crashing over there? Looking at the crash site, we also could see that, there was dirt and blood splatter on one side of walls over there, but not on the other side. So we were able to report that the plane had turned around and was heading back to try to land in Tehran while it was ablaze. But eventually this video emerged a couple of days later. And it was a missile that's coming up from the left, and that's it exploding at the nose of the plane as the plane is going from right to left. And the plane then continues ablaze along its path. again, this is the town Harand where it lost its signal. And while one of my colleagues is on the phone to the person who uploaded the video asking questions, I'm trying to geolocate the video. And the person who uploaded it said, we asked him, why were you filming at that moment? And he said, well, I heard a bang, then I started filming and there was a second explosion, and then I saw a plane ablaze going ahead. So that kind of started filling in the detail that we were hearing from other witnesses. And so, because we were familiar with this town, we were able to geolocate it to this corner here. You can see the buildings in the distance. If I were to zoom in, they match. But there was also this security hut and a little oven outside it, and the shadow of the oven and the shadow of this light, the security light, gave it away. But we can also now calculate the site of the explosion. It loses its signal here the first time it's hit, and it's hit a second time here, which sends it into a fireball that continues. To verify that video, we also kind of use a bit of Pythagoras because we know the flight path and we know the x and the y, the height and the location. We can calculate the hypotenuse, and we can calculate the distance that sound would travel over, the time that sound would travel over a distance. You see the flash, you hear the bang 11 seconds later. So that's just another point of corroboration for us. So they're sort of more of the dots that we're trying to connect. I'm just going to talk about Breonna Taylor and her killing by police in the US, which was sort of a 3-4 month investigation by our team. There was no video of her killing because the police didn't turn on their body cameras. But what we did have was all of this. Sorry. So that was it. The Attorney General said that the cops arrived, announced themselves adequately, and conducted the raid properly, and so they, they were justified in what happened. But and it is true, when Kenneth Walker, her boyfriend, when they were woken up from bed that night, he fired a shot, thinking that it was an intruder. And in his interview taken hours afterwards, he says, "I feel like I shot once and I aimed low because I didn't want to hurt anybody," and that's exactly what happened. You can tell from the evidence. But the police completely overreact then, and the raid, they hadn't announced themselves properly, and then they once that happened, just all hell broke loose. So they didn't film it. They didn't turn on their body cameras. They should have. 2 of them were set up for it. The rest of them should have had rigs on for it. They were really hastily assembled. This was a no-knock warrant that they changed to a knock warrant. But they basically were, it was a team that hadn't worked together. They had faulty intelligence. The guy who was staking out the apartment for hours before the raid didn't even see Breonna Taylor coming back with her boyfriend, thought that she was alone. They didn't know that her sister lived there. They didn't know that her goddaughter regularly stayed over, her 2-year-old goddaughter. So it could have been a lot worse. But what we did have was all of this evidence, photographs, all of those videos that we talked about, transcripts of other interviews with neighbors and so forth. And again, just thinking about time and space, just mapping all of this evidence out in time and space, you began to see what unfolded and how it went so badly wrong, and gained a much deeper understanding, say an indelible understanding of that night and how the police screwed up so badly that the grand jury weren't given because the evidence wasn't presented in that way. Here we go. So here are just some of the photos. It was somebody who was close to the investigation, who was frustrated, I think, with the progress, who finally gave access to all of these files, sent me a Dropbox link. And I remember vividly looking through those photographs the first night and thinking, oh my God, there's way more bullets fired here. And they went into almost every room, every household objects, up through the apartment upstairs and out through the roof of that apartment, all the shell casings that are left behind. And that was twice as many bullets as the police had counted up until that point, or had admitted to firing up until that point. And then we had all of this other footage, and you could tell from the body language of the SWAT team and what they were saying to each other inside. They were like, oh my God, they were shocked about what had happened, because they're the professional team that usually conduct raids, and they had been conducting one across town and had actually told the team not to conduct this raid. So what we did was we started working with Anjali Singhvi, who's a trained architect, but a brilliant graphics reporter on our graphics team. She started collecting, 3D tours of these apartments, similar apartments for rent in this complex, floor plans. I went there and took videos and photographs outside to capture the dimensions, and then started putting these photographs in place inside in the model of the apartment, and reconstructing, again, a bit like Gaza, the crime scene, a precise model of the crime scene, and then very meticulously going bullet hole by bullet hole, and sketching the path of the bullets, where they entered and exited different objects, so that we could see, and you can see we're building over time those bullet trajectories. And we wanted to capture what it looked like inside and outside as well of the doorway, because it's really a story of two sides of that doorway. But then also we had hours and hours and hours of, like, dozens of tapes of these guys being interviewed and re-interviewed again, some of them immediately afterwards, some of them days afterwards, some of them weeks afterwards. And you can notice a slight discrepancies in their testimonies as time goes on. But we had those transcripts, and they're each describing what the other officer is doing and who they see to their left, to their right, in front of them, behind them, what they're saying to each other, who gives the order, and all of that. And so, a bit like Ahmaud Arbery, I started sketching that out using these color codes for each officer in the model that Anjali had created, and then inserting them in where we have the trajectories. We know from the ballistics reports who fired, how many bullets they fired, whether they emptied their magazines or not. And so that whole 3D reconstruction really helped us, understand their testimony and what went down minute by minute. Even second by second, I think we kind of stretched time to explain what happened and how it went so badly wrong. Anjali was also looking up the models of the cars. She wasn't content to just put in any vehicle. She had the precise make and model of them. And then we started building the story. And, there are little details in the story when you go to the scene or you listen to their testimony that make all the difference. So it's the storytelling is all in the detail. They saw her bedroom light flickering, but there was a TV on, but everywhere else was dark. So this is a 1 a.m. raid. So they know she's in bed, probably. Another little detail when I was down there is that the only light in this breezeway, they called it, this hallway, was here, behind the police. So they were silhouetted as they were knocking that door in. They're dressed here in our model in sort of grey clothes, but they're actually wearing dark clothes, jeans, dark tops like this. And so Breonna has fallen asleep. They had been watching a movie. Kenneth's awake. They're about to go to sleep, and the police start banging at the door, ramming at the door, and this is how they're situated. And they say they're hollering. This guy, Cosgrove, and the guy beside him is Mattingly. There's a police procedure where you're supposed to, you never go into the fatal funnel, as they call it, where you get stuck in a doorway, and if there's a gunman inside, you've got nowhere to go, left, right, back, or forward. But what they do is they step immediately into it. At this stage, Breonna has woken up, Kenneth has walked up. They're like, what the hell is going on? They're shouting, who is it? Who is it? He thinks it might be her ex-boyfriend who had been caught up in drug dealing, sent away to prison. And so he's got his handgun by his bedside, comes out, and as soon as the door comes off the hinges, he shoots a shot. And then Mattingly gets hit in the leg on his thigh, returns fire. This guy, Cosgrove, steps in now into the fatal funnel as well, instead of all of them peeling back away from the doorway, and unloads his weapon. And he stops firing only when his weapon stops him firing. And he says he completely blanked. He doesn't know what happened. So he unloads all of his weapons. Guy standing up here, because he was so out of control, he fired everywhere. And the FBI ballistics report determined that one of those bullets was the bullet that killed her. And so had he, followed police protocols, had he been in control of his weapon, perhaps she would have been very badly wounded and injured, but perhaps she would have survived. We also looked at why all of the bullets were so low to the ground with 3 former Marines, and we knew the model of gun, and that was really interesting to us as well. Even though we didn't get it into it in the story, it suggested that they didn't have good trigger control, because this particular model, if you don't have good trigger control, it pulls down, and it keeps pulling down. So a lot of those bullets went into the carpet, and you can see that they sprayed everywhere, basically. Officer Hankinson comes out front and starts shooting. He thinks the gunman inside is shooting, but it's actually Cosgrove who's continuing to shoot into the thing. So he thinks that they're under fire and returns fire through, blind windows here and here. And he shoots so much that they actually go through. Kid in here. Somebody needs to tell me what the hell's going on. So that's what it looked like. Miraculously, the boyfriend survived. What was also interesting then was the 911 calls and the interviews that the neighbors gave about whether the police adequately announced their presence, because Taylor the boyfriend was saying, we didn't know who it was. We thought it was an intruder. And the police were all adamant, no, we knocked and announced. None of the neighbors in 7 of the 8 apartments here heard the police announce themselves. And also neighbors who were out having a cigarette at the time, as down 50 yards down here to the left. This apartment next door here, windows were open, and they didn't hear anything. There was one man who did come out and see the police officers, but again, just spatially representing where the evidence came from was relevant to it. So anyway, a lot of spreadsheeting of evidence, and all of the different ballistics reports are different item codes, and so we had to correlate those, and each of them had different details, like DNA or particular scratches on the bullets, as linking them to a particular weapon and a particular gunman, and so on, like a particular officer. And then also being on the ground, and went down there before the grand jury announcement, and attended an interrogation of the police there as well, just to get that sort of reporting, even though it doesn't really feature in the story. But just being there, and being there in the moment that judgment is given, helped us kind of situate viewers into the story and the stakes of the story for the local community. This is how it looks like in French. So then we don't do very many happy stories, as my daughter says. Dad, are you doing a happy story this time? We do a lot of accountability work, and that's obviously war crimes and police killings and things like that. But again, in Bucha, Ukraine, when Russian forces withdrew from there at the end of March, I'm sure many of you have seen those horrific images of bodies strewn across the streets, and some of these pictures are graphic. The Russians very quickly came out and said it wasn't us. We were gone by March 30. Those bodies weren't there. In fact, they looked like actors, and a variety of other reasons why. Well, then, very simply, that Sunday night, I went on to Maxar, is a satellite imagery provider that we have access to, and looked at those streets from the middle of March 9th, March 10th, March 15th, 17th, and so on. And you could see these shapes appear on the ground that looked like they were about the size of the bodies. And then, one of those videos, not after they left. So anyway, they're it's, you might wonder, are they puddles of water? But they line up exactly with the bodies that were found in the videos, and they don't leave the area. The puddles of water stay even when it's sunny, and you can see other pools of water evaporating and what have you. So it was fairly, concrete evidence, but the Russians still took that and broadcast it on. They felt they had to respond on their national TV stations as fake, as a Western conspiracy and a provocation against Russia. Sorry, I should have warned you about that image. But they weren't the only bodies that were found. One other image, you can look away if you want, is this one of 8 men, hands bound, shirts pulled over their heads, found in a courtyard about a mile away along the same street. And they also denied anything to do with this. So we went into Bucha. We've spent weeks there and are still in and out of it. And so we very quickly collected witness testimony and testimony from family members, from doctors, coroners, police, investigators, and military officials over time. And their stories were consistent, that the Russian soldiers came, rounded up people, were looking for military-aged men, but also killed civilians, and seemed to be indiscriminate. And that, ordinarily for a reporter, traditional print reporter, I suppose, would be good enough to publish. And we did publish that with photographs and describe some of the injuries that our teams documented. But we also wanted documentary evidence, the visual investigations team, and that came by the satellite images you saw, drone. We got drone video from the Ukrainian military, witness video, who filmed the Russian sources, and CCTV along the streets. It took us about 6 weeks to get all of that, as well as crime scene evidence, documents and databases of the Russian military, packing slips that the Russians left behind at the crime scene, bullet casings they left behind, text messages sent by people who were killed while they were hiding, and then the Facebook posts of families searching for them, and then a police telegram channel of victims as they were collecting victims, describing their clothes, where they were found, and pairing, the clothing of the men and the injuries that we could see in the photographs from that courtyard with, the police reports of the victims. And so what we ended up with was, again, witness testimony. Very on, we got describing is that group of 8 men being brought in here, be put on their knees on the ground here. All of those witnesses we interviewed were from these surrounding houses, who the Russians also rounded up and brought and held here. Some of them were actually put in with the group of men, but pleaded their case and got out. That man that was interviewed last there, he served with the Russian army against the Soviet army in Afghanistan, and one of the Russian soldiers, his father, had done the same, and so they cut him a break and let him free. So he was very lucky. And they all describe seeing the men being brought around to the back there of the building. So again, just going to the crime scene, documenting what we casings on the ground that we're able to identify as a type of shell that's used by Russian rifles. Army rations are around, and the whole building was taken as a base by the Russians, and we could see that clearly going through the base. But how do I? And then next one here. But one of the witnesses before we published So one of the people we interviewed was a survivor. I was highly skeptical of his story, but we kept going back to him, asking questions, and repeatedly we found answers through doctors who had treated his wounds, people who were in a basement with him who were giving him painkillers, his wife, another doctor who signed a certificate saying that he had been shot so that he could leave the country, because men of fighting age were being held back to fight if they needed. But also in here, he had previously described to us his position in the group of men, how they were walking, that they were clutching each other's belts face down, where they were brought from. All of that information stood up, and the guy who was standing behind him, we could tell that that's the guy, and we could tell it's him in this video as well. So it completely corroborated his story. So anyway, that's the guts of it. It was a written story, just by incredible reporting by Yusur Alhu and Masha Froliak, who's from Kiev, and the two of them were staying, 20-25 minute drive from here while the Russians were occupying this town, and I couldn't believe what they saw, what had been happening for the weeks that they were just there. I remember them vividly saying there's bodies everywhere, because we were trying to, in the phone calls, trying to identify where every body that they were documenting was found, so that we could check witness testimony against satellite imagery or against the drone footage. And there were guys, look, there's just bodies everywhere, and it was just a horrific scene. But this is one massacre, potential war crime. This is the survivor here, Ivan Skiba, and this is Vitaly, one of the guys who was killed. They were manning a checkpoint in the days before the Russians came in. They had signed up for the armed forces. They're all from Bucha or the surrounds, and they were there to sort of protect. These are the soldiers who came in. We were able to identify them from their clothing and their equipment as paratroopers. And they also left packing slips pointing to particular military units in the building, and were able to identify some of them through social media. There were rosters of soldiers left behind there as well, and by searching social media, we could find that they were associated with the 104th or 234th brigades. So anyway, that's how that looks in print. And then finally, if I have time, is there time? Yeah. So day rate. So this is the Capitol riot, and unlike Bucha or unlike Breonna Taylor, it's more video than we knew what to do with, frankly. We started collecting on the day itself. Thousands of people swarming the building all over DC on that day, and all of them documenting it and live streaming it, and tweeting about it and posting on Parler, which is a popular platform. Anyway, and so there's just tons of footage. I might just play the intro to this as well. So all of you filmmakers will see the newsy top that we put on our pieces, and it's very much capturing the nut graph of the piece, because we're a digital platform. We don't have a sit-down audience, and so we're trying to capture, like, you know, what's the story, what's the problem we're going to solve, what's at stake here, how we're going to solve it, and what you're buying into if you're going to sit and watch the other 40 minutes of this thing. So that's just kind of a style that we do, which has become a little bit formulaic, that we're trying to break out of a little bit. So, but there was a bit more of a cinematic approach to the start of that. Do you have a question?
Oh, no,
No? Sorry.
I'm sure that's supposed to be. No,
Anyway, so tons of videos. I mean, thousands of videos. I think we had well over 3,000. So we have an archive log, an assistant editor, archivist, in addition to all of the the sort of network news and the fringe platform broadcasts that we were analyzing and transcribing, which give you a flavor of the mood leading up to that. And for us, that was very important, just to capture that political campaign, that political disinformation, because you hear that very directly echoed in the rioters throughout the day as their motivation for being there and what they're doing. And it's almost like this immersive walk along with them, with their camera phones through the building, around the building as they're trying to get in, and all of that. So from the start, we very deliberately set out. I'll show you in the next spreadsheet. We set out to to capture, again, chronology is our friend in this. We're using our live streams and the metadata from the videos that we have to plot out what video is happening where all the way through it. And then some of the live streams are 4, 5, 6 hours long. One of them 8 hours long. And so that live stream gives us a precise timestamp at the runtime to match up other videos that we're finding of that scene and showing it from multiple angles. And we're describing in the spreadsheet, we're not putting everything, we're just putting in moments of note and significant events, punctuated by significant events through the whole thing, so that we can break off and analyze different sides of the Capitol as part of a team, because there's so much for us to get through. There was 10 of us here, 2 looking at the prelude, the disinformation, the organization of the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all of the social media chatter, 2 looking at the approach the morning of and leading up to 12:53 when violence first broke out, 2 more looking at 12:53 leading up to the West Plaza, 1 more person looking at the Upper Plaza where a lot of people, there's a lot of violence and people died, and then other people looking at the interior and the eastern side of the Capitol. And so we're doing that, breaking down the footage in that way, and then consulting with each other on patterns and connections we're seeing between all of these different scenes. And what was really interesting about it, and one thing we decided from very early on, is to capture the sound on tape. So we knew that hearing this story told by as much as by the narrator as by the rioters was really going to be the thing that that really told it properly and sold this idea of the call and the response, the call of Trump and his cronies, his allies, and the response of the people. And you see that happening even in real time, because Trump tweets at some stage while the Capitol is engulfed, not to call people off, but to blame Mike Pence. And you hear people like in the following hours saying, "Hang Mike Pence," directing their ire at Mike Pence. And he also, Trump, in his speech earlier that day, attacked Mike Pence, saying, "I hope he's going to do right by me," and call off this count of the electoral ballots, but also the precise wording he's used. Somebody is echoing that through a bullhorn we need to get real patriots to come in and save democracy and our constitution. So it's amazing. And then the live streams that are happening, people on one side, which has been peaceful, knows that they're going crazy on the west. Say, "Come on, let's go." They're going at it on the west end side. And we now know, actually, we're doing a follow-up project on the Proud Boys and the role that they played at critical junctures. Parler was a very popular platform among Trump supporters, but it was taken offline. Amazon said, "We're not going to support it anymore." Thankfully, somebody had taken an archive of all of the public posts and made that available to us. And so our engineers very quickly whipped up an instance of Parler, if you like, that we were hosting internally, and then automatically transcribed and played with the best transcription services out there to transcribe those videos. And they had metadata, they had the latitude, longitude, and time that they were posted. So you could kind of map out where these videos were and when. And that was really helpful. And it took us five of us about a week to go through those. And then we were also using, tools like Microsoft Video Indexer. And what that allows you to do is to upload a video and it'll pull out the faces. And if there's somebody of interest in there, you can click on that face and it'll tell you everywhere that they see that face in the video. It doesn't identify them. It doesn't do facial recognition, as people might know it in, using private data, which is ethically questionable. It'll do this. It'll pick out, scenes. It'll pick out objects. It'll pick out themes, anger, violence. And so you can click on those and see where those people turn up time and time again. So if there's a Proud Boy or an Oath Keeper that you see, or the first person inside the building, and see where they go, it's kind of helps with the reporting. And what we're doing with that is we're also, just looking at the detail. It's all it's never about the videos themselves. I suppose I should tee this all up with. It's the analysis of the videos. And so what is the detail within the video? What is the information within the video that can help our reporting and we can extract reporting from? So this is Roseanne Boyland, who we saw earlier in the day. And she's here towards the front of the upper West Terrace. And she dies here a couple of minutes later, actually. And people trying to pull her out. And there's in that moment, this is kind of good for the story, but also it's kind of expresses the sadness of the whole story. People are ironically chanting "Black Lives Matter, I can't breathe" in that moment. The whole crowd is chanting it, and she's literally on the ground being trampled to death. So it's a scene that is a powerful moment just by virtue of synchronizing up all of the videos. There's another moment where they get right inside the Capitol. Maybe I'll show that later. Officer Sicknick. For months, people didn't know what happened to him. He was a police officer who died. We were able to track what happened to him, and then the guys who sprayed him in various different footage and what they were holding in their hands as well, the particular model of spray. I'll show another couple of clips. Tracking the Oath Keepers. Once two of them were indicted, we were able to find out who they were with on that day and what they did. Again, by just calling out the faces in the crowd and tracking their movements. Anyway, this whole thing ended up into a series of interactives and videos on the whole thing, and then using graphics to sort of map out the playing field. Trump is speaking over here, the Capitol is here, and then kind of using the graphics almost to take a step back because it's all quite intense, reorient the viewers, but also set up this sense of foreboding that everybody knows what's going to happen at the Capitol, and you're sort of slowly narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. The paltry police setup, because we also reported on the intelligence failings. There were warnings repeatedly given, but they didn't man up on the security. They also withheld crowd control equipment from the police, and so they were just left to their own devices. 150 officers were injured. And then just using the graphics to kind of, against what's about to happen, what you're about to see play out. The rioters got past the police here. They're up on this terrace, but they still haven't got in, and they need to go up these stairs, and then they'll get in the doors and the windows. And just using the modeling to sort of explain that in piece. There's a lone officer up here, Glover, who sprints down the hallway and directly over the rioters' heads down the stairs, and he holds them off down here while the Senate gets itself in order. And then he realizes that the senators are escaping down the stairs here and coming out just yards away from the rioters, behind the rioters. And so he draws them up the stairs again, where he knows backup is arriving here, and traps them in here. It's quite remarkable. He nudges them and coaxes them, the presence of mind to do that. Anyway, I wish this clip had played, but again, just by synchronizing it up, and it's, it was the clocks on the wall that meditated in the videos, and the C-SPAN footage as well. Kind of helped us realize that and stitch it together. So then we're using the graphics to show how they'll fan out across the building as well and over to the House of Representatives. So while the Senate goes into lockdown, the representatives carries on business for another 15, 20 minutes. And they don't realize that the rioters are just outside here. And it's that incenses the rioters over here, which leads to one of them being shot by the police. So, there were sort of details like that you're able to call out as well. And then into Pelosi's offices. So that's what we do, is we kind of collect, organize, analyze, see what story and reporting is emerging from it, work on the framing. In this case, it's, we end with the ongoing 6 months later, the ongoing campaign by the Republican Party to whitewash this and actually repoliticize it for their own ends, and showing what the scale of what happened. I think people didn't really understand the scale of what happened in the news clips from those days. Kind of try to bring an understanding of it together.
And Malachy, that unusually became a short film, isn't that right? It wasn't just a web piece, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it was. It had a theatrical release. It was a 40-minute piece, and we entered it into that sort of theatrical circuit, Critics' Choice, and the Academy stuff and things like that. So we've been doing this in the news world and in the journalism world for a while, and we wanted sort of to test. We felt it was an important story to reach the widest possible audience as well, but we wanted to sort of test this mode and what the doc world felt about this type of approach to filmmaking, and whether it would be appreciated, whether people would think it was more news than doc. And this is by far the longest piece that we've done. I think Breonna was 18 or 19 minutes. The Gaza story we did was about the same, which is really long for us for a digital video. This one was 40. And so that was our thinking there. Yeah.
Are there questions?
Any questions?
Hi. You're doing God's work. You talked at the beginning there about the kind of climate of disinformation and how work like this can serve to work against that. And I just wondered how much you think that's working, and whether you think it's going to take something else for that to break through. You know, the kind of work that you were doing with Bellingcat or whoever.
Yeah, and this is one of our team is ex-Bellingcat, and it's very similar work to Bellingcat. I think presentation may be a bit different, but I think that there is a huge trust issue in both mainstream media and other institutions, as I was saying earlier. But I think that what we very intentionally try to do with this is present the evidence. So it's state our case and maybe understate our case, and let the evidence kind of speak for itself. And we're building factoid upon factoid upon factoid, and trying to do it in an organized way that answers the journalistic questions about who, what, where, why, when, and how. And so these are all of the problems we have to solve in a particular story. And what is the evidence that we can collect in addition to testimony? I think for us, it's the combination of testimony and evidence that can create a powerful piece. And I think that what we found, particularly on YouTube, is that people really appreciate that. They like the transparency of it. And that's why the motion graphics is such an important part of this, and finding the treatments to call out details. Because as I said, it's not just not just the B-roll to show over some sort of broad sweeping statement or something that you might see on a 9 o'clock news bulletin. It's actually using the visuals, intentionally for some particular reason that we're showing that one, or you're hearing a particular thing. So I think in our small world, maybe we're making, the audience knows what it's going to get, I think, with visual investigations. The broader news landscape, I don't know. I think the more that you can convey to people that you're actually there bearing witness, like what we found with the Times is, on print, we'll often use what's called a dateline. So Dublin, Ireland, it was a beautiful 20-degree day outside, whatever. And people don't understand Dublin, Ireland, that the reporter is actually in Dublin, Ireland. And so introducing things like it's a beautiful sunny day here in Dublin, or and trying to more personalize the writing a little bit is an effort that we're undertaking, and others perhaps too. The more you can name sources, which is more and more difficult in this climate, I think, the ability of people to track them down and find out where they live, and I think people are becoming far more aware of their privacy. yeah, I don't know. But what we do is we try to collect evidence, partially inspired from a fear of getting it wrong and working at the New York Times getting it wrong on a platform
That
like
would be embarrassing.
very
yeah.
embarrassing. And we have on a couple of occasions, but thankfully nothing substantial. But yeah,
Okay.
so I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I was really interested to hear you say about a theatrical release, because clearly the platform matters, right?
Does.
In terms of actually breaking through beyond those who are already convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
excellent.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
dead right. And YouTube has been very good for us on that score, because at the times you get a certain audience. On YouTube, it's way younger, far more international, gender balanced, and there's huge engagement. There's like 70,000 comments on that piece on YouTube. Like I think it's 8 million or something now views,
Wow. Yeah,
which is, it just shows that off platform can take off and be shared and really start a conversation. We have getting into the weeds now that might not be relevant, but for every story we do, we'll have a rollout document, and we'll have a Twitter thread that will be copy edited and approved. We'll have a Telegram post, especially for the Russia stories, because Telegram is so popular over there, and we're getting good traffic from there. We'll have a YouTube post, different versions of language. We'll have GIFs created for YouTube. So if there's a development in the story, there's a community tab on YouTube, which is also an audience. And so we'll pop in like a development on Jan 6 that's significant and might make headlines, just to resurface the story and start the conversation again. Facebook posts, mobile alert language, and then various different versions of headline summary and homepage language and cover images or loops.
Amazing.
So there's a whole other post sort of work that goes in post publishing. We try to do it before we publish, but it's to hit as many different audiences and in a way that's native to those platforms, and Instagram too.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? No, I think we've been past. Sorry, Ross. Did you want to express our
There's a question. Yeah.
No, I mean, Malachy, it's such an incredible learning experience here, and to see the level of work you do to investigate truth and to counter stories that may have been in the public domain, that it's invaluable work, and I hope that it's reaching the audiences that it needs to, that the growth of this kind of video journalism, I think, is really valuable, and I hope it spans generations. I tend to be a print person, but I think we all need to engage with this kind of work more. So I mean, your presence here today, I think, will allow us all to find new ways to find news.
There's a lot more newsrooms doing it now, actually, so as well. So the Beeb and the Washington Post, and I think even Deutsche Welle are starting to do it, and so it's so you'll see more of it.
Well, thank you, Malachy.